breath. "Okay, climax," continued Artyom, slightly discouraged. "But in life, everything's different. First, a logical chain might not come to an end, and second, even if it does, nothing comes to a close because of it."
"You mean to say that life has no plot?"
asked Sergei Andreevich, helping Artyom formulate his words. Artyom thought for a moment, then nodded.
"But do you believe in fate?"
asked Sergei Andreevich, inclining his head to the side and examining Artyom studiously, while Yevgeny Dmitrievich turned away from the hooker with interest. "No," said Artyom decisively. "There is no fate, just random events that happen to us, and then we make things up on our own later."
Too bad,
sighed Sergei Andreevich disappointedly, austerely looking at Artyom over his eyeglasses.
"Now I'm going to present a little theory of mine to you, and you see for yourself if it matches your life or not. It seems to me that life, of course, is an empty joke, and that there's no purpose to it at all, and that there's no fate, which is to say, anything explicit and definite along the lines of you're born and you already know that you're going to be a cosmonaut or ballerina, or that you'll die in your infancy. No, not like that. While you're living your allotted time, how do I explain this? It may happen that something happens to you that forces you to perform specific actions and make specific decisions, keeping in mind you have free will and can do this or that. But if you make the right decision, then the things that happen to you subsequently are no longer just random, to use your word, events. They are caused by the choices that you made. I don't intend to say that if you decided to live on the red line before it went communist that you'd be stuck there and that corresponding events would happen to you. I'm talking of more subtle matters. But if you again were to find yourself at the crossroads and once more made the needed decision, then later you will be faced with a choice that will no longer seem random to you if, of course, you realize and can understand it. And your life will gradually stop being just a collection of random events. It will turn into a plot, I suppose, where everything is connected by some logical, though not necessarily straight, links. And that will be your fate. At a certain stage, if you have traveled sufficiently far along your way, your life will have turned into a plot to the extent that strange things will occur that are unexplainable from the point of view of naked rationalism, or your theory of random events. Yet they will fit very well into the logic of the plot line that your life has by then turned into. I think fate doesn't just happen. You need to arrive at it. And if the events in your life come together and start to arrange themselves into a plot, then it may cost you quite far. It is most interesting that a person may not even suspect that this is happening to him, or may conceive what has happened based on a false premise, by attempting to systematize events to match his own worldview. But fate has its own logic. The strange theory, which at first seemed to Artyom to be complete mumbo-jumbo, suddenly forced him to look at everything that had happened to him from the very beginning, when he had agreed to Hunter's proposal to leave for Polis, from a new point of view. Now all of his adventures, all his travels, which he had previously viewed as unsuccessful and desperate attempts to achieve the goal of his quest, which he pursued wherever it led him, appeared before him in a different light, and it seemed to him to be an elaborately organized system that formed an ornate yet well-thought-out structure. Because if one considered Artyom's acceptance of Hunter's proposal as the first step along the way, as Sergei Andreevich had said, then all subsequent events, including the expedition to Rishkaya, and the fact that Bourbon approached him at Rishkaya, and that Artyom didn't recoil from him, constituted the next step, and that Khan came to meet him, although he could have remained at Sukharevskaya. Yet this could be explained some other way as well. At any rate, Khan himself cited completely different reasons for his actions. Then Artyom was taken prisoner by the fascists at Tverskaya, and should have been hanged. But circumstances so arranged themselves that the International Brigade decided to attack Tverskaya precisely on that day. Had the revolutionaries shown up a day earlier or a day later, Artyom's death would have been unavoidable, and then his quest would be ended. Could it actually be that the persistence with which he pursued his path influenced future events? Could it be that the determination, rage, and desperation that drove him to take every next step created in some unknown way a reality that wove a set of chaotic events and someone's thoughts and actions into an ordered system, thereby turning an ordinary life into a plot, as Sergei Andreevich had said? At first glance, nothing of the sort could happen, but if you thought about it, how else did one explain the meeting with Mark, who offered Artyom the single possible way of getting into the Hansa territory? And the main thing, the very main thing, is that while he was accepting his lot cleaning out toilets, fate, it would seem, turned away from him. But when he took the bit between his teeth without even trying to understand his actions, the impossible happened. The guard who was supposed to stay at his post disappeared somewhere, and there wasn't even any pursuit. So when he returned from the diverging crooked path back onto his way, acting in harmony with the narrative pattern of his life, at the stage where he was now, this could already have resulted in a serious warping of reality, repairing it in such a way that the main line of Artyom's fate could develop further, without hindrance.
Then this must mean that, should he deviate from his goal or step off his path, fate would immediately abandon him, and its invisible shield, which currently safeguarded Artyom from being killed, would directly crumble into pieces, and the thread of Ariadne that he was so carefully following would break, and he would be left face to face with the turbulent reality that had been infuriated with his impudent intrusions into the chaotic substance of reality. Might it be that whoever once attempted to deceive fate and was flippant enough to continue to persevere even after dire clouds had gathered overhead couldn't just simply step off the path? From then on, his life would turn into something completely commonplace and grey, and nothing else would ever happen that was unusual, magical, or unexplainable, because the plot had been interrupted, and he'd put paid to the hero business. Did this mean that Artyom not only hadn't the right, but couldn't deviate from his path? That was his fate. The fate in which he did not believe, and in which he did not believe because he didn't know to interpret what had happened to him, didn't know how to read the signs posted along the road, and continued to naively believe that the road that led to far horizons, and which had been constructed just for him, was a jumbled tangle of abandoned pathways that led in different directions? It seemed that he was proceeding along his path, and that the events of his life formed a harmonious plot that held sway over human will and reason, so that his enemies were blinded, while his friends saw the light and were able to help him in time. It was a plot that so controlled reality that the immutable laws of probability obediently changed their shape, like putty, in response to the growing power of an invisible hand that moved him over the chessboard of life. And if it were actually so, then the question, what's the point of all this, which previously could be answered only with sullen silence and gritted teeth, went away. Now the courage with which he professed to himself, and stubbornly maintained to others, that there was no providence or any higher plan, that there was no law and no justice in the world, turned out to be unnecessary, because that plan could be divined. He did not want to resist this thought. It was too seductive to turn away from it with the same die-hard stubbornness with which he had rejected the explanations offered by religions and ideologies. As a whole, this meant only one thing. "I can't stay here any longer," said Artyom, and got up, feeling as if his muscles were filling with a new buzzing strength. "I can't stay here any longer," he repeated, listening attentively to his own voice. "I have to go. I must." No longer constantly twisting his head around and having forgotten all the fears that drove him to this small fire, he jumped onto the tracks and moved ahead into the darkness. Artyom's doubts released him, making room for perfect peace and the confidence that he was finally doing everything right. It was as if, having been driven off course, he nevertheless was able to recover his feet on the shining rails of his fate. The ties on which he walked now almost passed under his feet by themselves, requiring no effort on his part. In an instant, he disappeared completely into the darkness. "It's a beautiful theory, isn't it?" said Sergei Andreevich, inhaling. "One would almost think that you believe it," replied Yevgeny Dmitrievich cantankerously, scratching the cat behind the ear.